Hello. Today's live will address this fear that many of us have about our imperfections, our mistakes as parents, ultimately harming our children. I'm Dr. Thornton, Dr. Amber. Sorry, that was super formal. I'm Dr. Amber. Many spaces people call me Dr. Thornton. Usually I'm a 9 to 5. But on here, everybody calls me Dr. Amber. I'm a clinical psychologist and I am also a mom of 2. And I'm an author. I recently wrote a book called A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation. And in that book, I talk about how hard it can be for parents to regulate themselves, especially when they're trying to teach their children how to self-regulate. And ultimately, we go through a process and a journey in that book of how to, you yourself, learn the process of self-regulation that you then will model for your children. We demystify the myths and all the challenges and obstacles around self-regulation and dysregulation as a parent, and we talk it through. So I'm so excited for that book to be here. Book is released in June, and you can pre-order it today. In the meantime, though, let's talk about this today. This fear that many of us have as parents, that if we're too imperfect, if we make too many mistakes, that it will ruin our kids, or it will rupture the relationship we have with our kids, so much so that our children will no longer want to have a relationship with us, or that it will damage it beyond repair. And I just want to talk about that a little bit. I want to talk about where we think that comes from. I want to talk about what we do if we have that fear. I want to talk about how prevalent that fear might be. And then also tell you where we can continue this conversation, because I also want to let you know that I have a podcast, Dr. Amber's Know and Grow podcast, and actually next week's episode on the podcast, I go much more in depth about this specific fear. So if you are enjoying this, or you can't finish the rest of this today, I encourage you subscribe to the podcast, Dr. Amber's Know and Grow podcast, on your podcasting app, or you could also watch it on YouTube. Just go to my YouTube channel and you'll be able to catch it there on Monday. Okay, so I am curious. I want to throw this out there. How many of you are parents and have had this fear that if you make too many mistakes as parents, or if you're too imperfect, that it will mess up your kids? Like, let's just be honest. And I'll go ahead and raise my hand, because yes, I'm a psychologist. Yes, I'm a professional. Yes, I'm an author, and I wrote a parenting book, but I still have these fears, and I want to talk you through when I felt those fears the most and what I did about them. So my kids are still small, you all. I have a 2 and a 4-year-old, and I distinctly remember when I had an infant and a 2-year-old. And let me just tell you, that year when my kids were like 0 and 2 and then going into like 1 and 3 was probably one of the hardest years of my life as a mom. You know, there were a lot of hard things going on in my life, but then also I was also adjusting to becoming a mom of 2 from going from a mom of 1. And I think many of you probably can resonate with the fact that that transition from going from mom of 1 to mom of 2, or 2 to 3, is very challenging. And I think the thing that we don't talk about enough as parents, and especially as moms, is that in the midst of those transitions, whether it's becoming a new mom or growing your family, you may not be your best self in those moments. We're just not. We're not going to be our best selves. We're not going to be our most perfect selves. We're not going to show up in the ways that we want to, or that we, imagine. And here's the reason why. It's because your energy, your capacity, your brain space is really all being put towards adjustment, equilibrium, right? I think sometimes we completely undermine and dismiss how much effort and energy is required for us to adjust to a new phase of life. And this could be with having a new child, growing your family. It could be with a shift in your career, or getting a new job. It could be with changes in a relationship or your marriage. And it could be also good things. Like, good things could be happening in your lives, and there still is an adjustment process. And so with those moments of adjusting, me going from mom of one to mom of two, I absolutely was not my best self as a mom. Now, looking back on it 2 years later, I can see it more clearly. But in the moment, it just felt like, my God, I keep messing up. I'm unhappy. I'm sad. I'm irritable. I'm anxious. And that's coming out in this dysregulated version of me that can't be present, that can't be joyful, that can't just get on the floor and play because my mind is in so many places. I thought that was me being a bad mom, or I thought that was me being too imperfect and that I needed to work on myself. But really, it was me adjusting to something that was challenging. And so now if you take that and you then apply it to the fact that all of us are human and we all will go through adjustments in our lives, whether it's in your family, at your job, yourself personally, adjustments take work, energy, capacity, and also may not allow you to show up as your best self when you're adjusting to something, right? Like, let's take it another example. Let's say you get a new job, right? We've all had that experience. You get a new job, your first week on the job, your first month on the job. Sometimes you're a little nervous or a little anxious. And why? It's because you're learning. It's because you're learning the process of this new job. You're learning the building. You're learning the people. You're learning the software. I don't know. You're learning. And then what happens when we're in that learning process, we get a little insecure sometimes because it's like, oh, I don't want them to think I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't want them to think that I don't know how to do this. And we have to remind ourselves, hey, this is a learning process. Of course you don't know how to do it yet because you're going to learn it. Of course you're not the best yet because you have to go through the process. Of course you're unfamiliar. The same thing can be applied to motherhood and parenting. And so why is it that we don't give ourselves that grace, that compassion to really understand that when we ourselves are growing into motherhood or parenthood, that means we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to be imperfect. In the process of growing and learning or moving through a phase of transition when it comes to being a mom or being a parent, you may not show up as your best self. And that is okay. That is normal. That is part of the adjustment process. And that was definitely the case for me. So now let's go to this other part of, if I'm too imperfect, if I make too many mistakes during these moments where I'm in transition or these moments where I'm just trying to learn, will that hinder my child's development? Will that mess up my kids? What do you all think about that? I spend a lot of time wondering, why are we afraid of this? Like, what is it? Like, why do so many of us have this fear that if we're too imperfect, if we make too many mistakes, if we yell too many times, if we're not present too many times, if we're will it mess things up? I have a few hypotheses. One, I do think that the internet, and it's so funny because you're on the internet now watching me, I think the internet definitely has played a role in making us feel a little bit more doubtful about our knowledge, our intuition as parents, and especially mothers. And it's twofold. It's like, it's amazing that we can go online and we can get all the information we need. We can listen to a professional talk. We can learn something on a live real quick. That's amazing. But what the internet has brought us is like this overabundance of information that can go into information overload. And with that, you just become a little bit more doubtful. You become a little bit more insecure because what if your thought or your process doesn't align with what this other person is saying? Or what if what works for you and your family doesn't look like what's working for this other person? Am I doing the right thing? Are they doing the better thing? Who knows? So I think that definitely places some doubt for sure. I also think that this experience, this fear of if I make too many mistakes, will it mess up my kid, feels, and actually if somebody is listening to this and if you disagree with me, I'm open to that because I have no evidence to prove this, but I do feel like this feels very uniquely millennial. Does it not? Is that just me? Like, it feels like there's something about our generation, those of us who are parenting right now, who might be millennials, where it's like we have experienced a lot of things with our parents' generation. We also experienced a lot of ways in which we became adults and then felt like maybe there were some things that were unmet, especially when it came to emotional development or mental health. I think that's a very universal, unique experience for people who are parenting now. Many of us are millennials, not all of us. Some of us are, some of you are Gen X. Probably a tiny bit of you are Gen Z. But I think people who are parenting now have this experience of feeling like there were some things unmet when it came to emotional development, connection. And now as parents, we're trying to fix that. And that's not to say our parents did everything wrong, because they absolutely didn't. But there were some things that we're now wanting to improve on. And so I think we are just super sensitive and highly aware of areas that we feel were underdeveloped for us as kids, and now we want to absolutely develop for our kids. So I see how that experience even can make it feel like, if I mess this up, what does that mean for my kid, right? Like, what does that mean? Will my child be able to thrive in the world? Will they be able to have the emotional capacity to handle hard things? Am I preparing my children to be able to regulate their own emotions if I cannot do it myself? Those are the questions that we're asking ourselves. And I think that's why many of us are so afraid that if we make too many mistakes, it will mess something up. I'll be honest with you, I can't even refute that, because the fact is, sometimes people do make a lot of mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes can have big consequences. But I think instead what I want us to do is really shift our perspective to one that is a lot more supportive, and one that'll actually help you through the process of continuing to learn yourself as a parent and as a mother. And it is this: just like we just talked about, as a mom, as a parent, you're constantly in a state of adjusting, right? You're not who you were a month ago. You're not who you were a year ago. Absolutely not. You're learning, you're growing, you're changing. And that is like this continual adjustment process. You're also improving as you go. So don't dismiss that. You're getting better. You're showing up for your kids. You're doing the work. But there's going to be moments where you make a mistake. There's going to be a moment where you're not perfect, because none of us are perfect. And what if we can embrace this idea that as a mom, as a parent, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to be imperfect. And guess what? That actually enriches my child's life, and it also enriches my relationship with them, because what I'm going to give them is the tools and the skills to be able to handle it, right? So it's like, stop putting so much pressure on trying to be perfect. Stop putting so much pressure on trying to not make mistakes. Make your mistakes, be imperfect, because that's a given. That's going to happen. But instead, I want you to really lean into, how do I ensure that my child is equipped to handle big feelings? How do I make sure that my child is equipped to handle adverse experiences? How do I ensure that my child knows what it's like to be apologized to from me, right? So these are the things that I think we need to be focusing on instead. We need to shift our focus from, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to get this wrong. I need to be better, right? That's not what we're doing anymore. And instead, we're going to embrace, like, I'm not a perfect parent, y'all. I'm not. Ask my children. I'm not a perfect parent, but guess what? We're going to talk about how it feels when mommy makes a mistake. I'm going to be honest when my child asks me, am I sad? I'm going to apologize when I make a mistake. I'm going to practice those tools in the book for how to manage my dysregulation in the moment, even if it's in front of my kids. Because those are the things that help your kids see, no, my parent's not perfect, but that also means the world's not perfect. And guess what? I get to have permission to not be perfect too. So all in all, you embracing your imperfections, you embracing the fact that you're going to make mistakes as a parent, also gives your kid permission to make mistakes. It gives your kids permission to be imperfect, because they get to watch you cope and manage with your imperfections, and then they are better equipped to cope and manage with their own imperfections, right? I think that's how the cycle breaks. That's how the cycle ends. It's like we thought this whole time that the cycle ends with us being better, being more perfect, doing things better. When really the cycle ends with you just embracing the fact that you're gonna fuck some shit up. Like, yeah, you're gonna do something one day, your child's gonna not like you for a week. But guess what? We can repair it. We can repair it. Less focus, less on the mistakes, less on the imperfections, less on trying to control that, and more so on how do I equip my children, and how do I also make sure I'm equipped to handle mistakes, handle the consequences of mistakes, repair the ruptures in the relationships. How do I make sure that we know how to apologize? How do I make sure that we know how to sit with disappointment, frustration, irritability, sadness? Because the truth is, we can't push any of that away, even for our kids. So I hope that this is helping you think about some of the moments in your life where you are being unfair to yourself because you're pressuring yourself to be this perfect version of who in your mind you want to be, but in reality, because you are human, it may not be possible. And it's not possible not because you are not capable. It's not because there's something wrong with you. It's not because of any of that. And it's just because in life, and especially as mothers and parents, we need space and room to make mistakes. And so do our fucking kids. We all need space and room to make the mistakes. So again, I hope that this is helping you shift away from the fear of making mistakes, the fear of being too imperfect, and shifting more towards, okay, let's embrace these mistakes, let's embrace these imperfections. The more that I embrace them in myself, I'll be able to embrace them in my children, and then they also will be able to embrace the reality that they're going to make mistakes, that they're going to be imperfect, and that'll give them better tools and strategies to actually cope with challenges. Being imperfect lets you cope with challenge. And look, okay, I'm gonna say this, and it's gonna sound crazy, but go with me. What if being an imperfect parent actually does help your kid to cope better in the world? Because the world's not perfect, so why pretend at home? Okay, let me get off of here. But so a few things. If you enjoyed this conversation and you feel like you want a little bit more, subscribe to Dr. Amber's Know and Grow podcast, because I continue this very topic next week on the podcast. On Monday, that episode will be released, and it's all about addressing that question: will my imperfections traumatize my children? And so in that episode, I talk about that, but then also what actually could traumatize your children and how to decipher the difference. We need to really get to a place where we can understand what is the difference between me making a mistake and me doing something so detrimental that it actually could harm my child. I think somewhere along the way we lost sight of the difference, but they're two very different things. Yes, I can make a mistake as a parent. Yes, I can have a bad day as a parent. Yes, I can do something that I probably regret as a parent. But that isn't always the same thing as me doing something so detrimental to my child that it could traumatize them, harm their well-being, right? There's some overlaps for sure, but I want to make sure that we can really differentiate the two. So that episode next week will be available. Again, Dr. Amber's Know and Grow podcast. You can listen to that on your podcasting app or on YouTube, y'all, because I'm on YouTube now. Look, it's not perfect, but I'm trying. I'm trying. I'm really trying to build up the YouTube platform, and it's actually been really fun. Second thing I will tell you is this. If you noticed in yourself that you struggle with being able to handle your big feelings, your big emotions, being able to regulate yourself when you are experiencing challenges, obstacles, and you're just kind of like, if I can't even do this for myself, how can I do this for my kids, right? And that might be your pressure for being perfect. It's like, well, let me not make any mistakes because I don't even feel like I can help my kids handle when mistakes happen. Then I think you need my book. And so the book is called A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation. It's available for pre-order right now. And I think it'll be good for you because it'll help you to shift the focus away from what I feel like I need to teach my kids to what do I need to do to make sure I'm equipped with those things first. Because again, many of us as millennial parents right now, Gen X parents right now who are parenting children, especially small children, many of us are finding ourselves in these positions where it's like our kids are going to school, our kids are experiencing challenges, and you can see like, I want to better equip them to handle the things that they're going to handle, but I don't know how to do it because I am still struggling with how to handle and manage when things go wrong for me. And how does that show up for you? It could be constant irritability. It could be chronic fatigue that's showing up. It could be, y'all, actually, this is something I want to talk about a lot more. I think it affects a lot of moms. Emotional eating. That's something that I have really had struggles with and I'm really trying to work through. But I've noticed through the process of writing my book that one way that I tend to, not the best way, but to cope and to try to like calm my dysregulation is through food. Food. For many people, it might be drinking. For many people, it might be smoking, right? Or some other thing that you know is not the best habit for you. For many people, it could be how and why their depression is manifesting or their anxiety is manifesting. This dysregulated state of being that you haven't been able to crack through. And so if that sounds familiar to you, again, highly encourage you. Link in my bio to order the book, A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation. I'll also be talking a lot more about the book on the podcast as well. Okay, you all, I really enjoyed this live this morning. I hope you all did as well. My goal is to show up here at least once a week to talk a little bit more about topics just like this. And I'm excited to do it. I think this is the year for many of us to really break through some patterns that we have seen withstand for a very long time, and we're ready. Like, we're ready. We want the tools, we want the skills, but also we're in a place where we're just feeling ready to change things and shake things up, and I'm here to do it with you. So I look forward to more conversations with you, and I hope you have a great Thursday. Bye.